का जरूरत तो नहीं है, राइट? हाँ बट नहीं है ना माइक का जरूरत, ठीक है. सो आई वांटेड टू फर्स्ट अंडरस्टैंड कि आप लोग फोर्थ ईयर में हो, राइट? 7th सेमेस्टर. तो कैन समवन टेल मी अभी तक आप लोग ने लाइक व्हाट काइंड ऑफ प्रोजेक्ट्स हैव यू डन, व्हाट आर यू वर्किंग ऑन, व्हाट आर यू डूइंग इन द हाउसिंग मॉड्यूल? एनीवन? Just wanted to understand. Anyone can speak. Okay. Museum. Okay. Co-working space. Acha, okay. College as in institutional design. And then 7 is housing. So what all have you done in housing? Where all have you gone so far? Huh? Doing? Case studies. Like what kind of case studies are you doing? Okay. Huh. Okay. What kind of areas, like which all parts of Mumbai have you gone? Okay. Okay. So mapping the form. Okay. Okay. And this part never went to South Bombay? Or everyone went to South Bombay? Or they are different pockets? You went to Mira Bhayandar, they went different. So how many groups are there? 12 groups. So South Bombay, how many groups? 1. And then Mira Bhayandar? How many? These are the 2 or any other geography also? Any other? Mostly this. And you have some questions where you have to ask people, like what kind of questions do you ask? Okay. Did you also, any of you went into some slums, informal settlements? So which ones? Can you name any? What was the name of the slum you visited? You don't remember? No one remembers the name? What question? What did you find? What was the difference between someone living in a building versus someone living in a informal settlement? What were the answers like of the people, of the residents there? Right. Correct. Yeah. So those were in the chawls. Right. Are chawls and slums same thing? No. What is the difference? Okay. What else? What is the difference between how do slums get formed? Sorry, hell? Okay. Or why it is? क्या रहती है बेसिक फैसिलिटीज? हाँ. और क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स है स्लम्स के? एक्सेस टू बेसिक फैसिलिटीज, फिर हेल्थ हजार्ड्स, और क्या? हाउ डज वन डिफाइन स्लम? व्हाट डू गवर्नमेंट्स किसी को स्लम कैसे डिक्लेयर करता है? कोई पर्टिकुलर नेबरहुड को? राइट. एंड इनहैबिटेबल, राइट? किसी ने तो इनहैबिटेबल वर्ड यूज किया. सो ये सब मल्टीपल वर्जन्स है स्लम्स के, राइट? अब इसमें अगर इट इज ऑल्सो अबाउट परसेप्शन, राइट, कि किस तरीके से हम उसको एज ए नेबरहुड देखे या एज अ स्लम देखे. लॉट ऑफ इट इज डिपेंडिंग ऑन द पॉलिसी में जो उनका टर्मिनोलॉजी जो डिक्लेयर किया जाता है, तो उसी के बेसिस पे देन एसआरए फॉर्म हुआ, स्लम रिहैबिलिटेशन अथॉरिटी, राइट. एवरीवन नोज अबाउट एसआरए, राइट. सो बिफोर आई स्टार्ट अबाउट सम ऑफ द इनिशिएटिव विच जो हमने कुछ सोचे हैं, आई वांटेड टू अंडरस्टैंड कि हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू नो दिस मॉडल एसआर slum redevelopment. कितने लोगों को पता है? Like, can someone explain me what is slum redevelopment? How does it happen? जितना पता है आप लोग को. बराबर. टू जो सेल कंपोनेंट हम जिसको बोलते हैं, राइट. इतना आइडियल और अच्छा और सुंदर मॉडल है ना ये. तो मुंबई इतना सुंदर क्यों नहीं है फिर? प्रॉब्लम क्या है? हाँ, कैसा है वो? कैन यू एक्सप्लेन बिजनेस कैसे है ये? And why do we call it vertical slum? Correct. And what does that lead to? अगर वो वर्टिकल स्लम लोगों को ऐसे जगह से उठा के अगर वर्टिकल स्लम में डाल दिया, तो व्हाट विल बी द इम्पैक्ट? उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या होगा? और लोग क्या करेंगे फिर? हाँ, एंड फिर वो घर में रहेंगे या नहीं रहेंगे? तो फिर किधर जाएंगे? Exactly, right. So you see how this is a cycle, a policy or a scheme which is designed to rehabilitate the dwellers actually promotes more again people going back to the same condition. But then if people are going to that same condition, there must be some reasons, right? तो एक reason है जैसे inhabitable, the buildings are inhabitable, light, ventilation, right? What are the other reasons? Why do people not want to live in taller structures after they have lived on ground या G+1 structures? और क्या reasons हो सकते हैं? ठीक है. But ये as far as the policy is concerned, these are free housing. राइट. द होल मॉडल क्या है इसमें? इट्स अ थ्री पार्टीज है इसमें, बराबर. मेन एक पार्टी है जो रेसिडेंट्स है, उनकी सोसाइटी, राइट, जो इनफॉर्मल सेटलमेंट्स में रहते हैं, वो एक पार्टी है. दूसरी पार्टी इज द डेवलपर जो उसको रीडेवलप कर रहा है, ठीक है. थर्ड इज, हु इज द थर्ड पार्टी? हु इज द थर्ड पार्टी? SRA, right? So there is slum rehabilitation authority, there is developer, and then there is people's cooperative housing society, right? इसमें SRA का क्या रोल है? ये तीन ट्रायंगल अगर हम सोचे तो what is the role of SRA? बराबर. तो what is their role? What do they do? हाँ, ठीक है. That is demarcating a slum area, a slum notified area. और क्या रोल है SRA का? Exactly. So monitoring, approval, लीगल अप्रूवल्स, राइट. डेवलपर का क्या रोल है? हाँ, इन्वेस्टर एंड बिल्डिंग दैट हाउसेस. और लोगों का क्या रोल है? साइलेंस, राइट. तो देन वेयर आर वी टॉकिंग अबाउट पीपल लेड हाउसिंग, राइट. हम जो कम्युनिटी पीपल लेड ये जो बोलते हैं, राइट, ये टर्म्स आप लोग ने सुने, राइट. आई थिंक Simpreet also had come, I think, last week, and then you are also working in Mira Bhayandar, अलग अलग जगह पे. When you talk to people, तो typically हम जो community बोलते हैं, do you see this community portion or people portion in the kind of buildings that are created in the city? Do you see that? Do you see people का involvement? Have you seen any good slum redevelopment project in Mumbai? जहां पे आपको देख के लगा कि अच्छा ये स्लम, अगर अच्छी बिल्डिंग दिखी तो हम उसको बोलेंगे अरे ये तो एसआरए वाली बिल्डिंग दिखी नहीं रही है. अब वैसा नरेटिव हो गया है, राइट. हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू बीन टू परेल एरिया? परेल स्टेशन देखा है सबने? वहां पे तुमने देखा कांच की बिल्डिंग और देयर आर दिस 4 ब्लॉक्स. यू सॉ दैट डिस्टेंस. दैट इज वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट एग्जांपल्स कि कितना क्लोजली वो बनाया गया है, राइट. सो इट्स अ क्रॉस सब्सिडी मॉडल एसेंशियली, राइट. व्हाट इज क्रॉस सब्सिडी? किसको समझता है टर्मिनोलॉजी? व्हाट इज क्रॉस सब्सिडी? सो क्रॉस सब्सिडी बेसिकली क्या होता है कि जमीन है, राइट. ये जमीन पे बसती है. हाँ, ठीक है. तो एक जमीन है. अब वो जमीन की कीमत बहुत ज्यादा होती है बॉम्बे में, राइट. सो टिपिकली हम जो व्हाट इज द स्क्वायर फीट रेट, एनीवन लाइक तुम लोग जहाँ रहते हो, व्हाट इज पर स्क्वायर फीट रेट? लेट्स से मीरा भाईंदर में जो रहते होंगे, व्हाट इज द पर स्क्वायर फीट रेट अंदाज से? किसी घर लेने जाना है मुझे तो 25,000. और व्हाट इज द कंस्ट्रक्शन कॉस्ट टिपिकली एक बिल्डिंग बनाने के लिए पर स्क्वायर फीट? 3 to 4,000. डिफरेंस क्या है? 25,000 माइनस 4,000 कितना? 21,000 एक्स्ट्रा. एक स्क्वायर फीट पे 21,000 एक्स्ट्रा वी आर पेइंग. व्हाट इज दैट कॉस्ट? व्हाट इज दैट एक्स्ट्रा कॉस्ट? बट हाँ, बट वाई? लाइक व्हाट? वो प्रॉफिट भी पूरा प्रॉफिट नहीं होगा ना वो, बिकॉज समवन इज ऑल्सो इन्वेस्टिंग दैट समवेयर. सो व्हाट इज दैट कॉस्ट डिफरेंस? वो पैसा कहाँ जा रहा है? नो, बट मेन कॉस्ट. व्हाट इज द मेन कॉस्ट? ठीक है, मैं एसआरए बोल भी नहीं रहा हूं अभी. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट एसआरए. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट मी गेटिंग अ हाउस इन एनी मार्केट, राइट. नरीमन पॉइंट में 1 लाख रुपए, 1 लाख रुपीज पर स्क्वायर फीट होगा लेट्स से. मीरा भाईंदर में 25,000 पर स्क्वायर फीट है. बट दोनों जगह कंस्ट्रक्शन कॉस्ट माइट बी 4 to 5,000 मैक्सिमम per square feet. But there the premium is 95,000 rupees extra they are taking for 1 square feet. Here they are taking 20,000 extra for 1 square feet. But the construction cost is broadly same. Then why is this difference? What is that cost? But still, what is that cost? On what basis? Yeah, exactly. It is the land cost. It is land. Whatever amount you pay, your 80% or 90% of the cost what you pay is the land cost, right? That is why the land in Nariman Point is more expensive than land in Mira Bhayandar. And if developer is putting money in land, then there is a profit margin and other margins. So automatically per square feet cost will increase, but then the major cost is land cost. And then there is a ready reckoner rate which government releases, which different pockets of the city has different land cost, जिसको RR rate बोलते हैं हम, ready reckoner rate. And how does the land cost is determined? By the location, what is the demand, where do people want to live, right? The areas which are less inhabitable, वहाँ पे land cost will be, so per square feet cost of the house would be, right? That's why people travel from Dombivli, Kalyan, Ulhasnagar, Mira Bhayandar to Parel. But they don't stay in Parel. Because in Parel, the construction cost might be same. But the game changer is the land cost. Because there are many commercial spaces. So commercial land cost increases more. Right? So similarly in SRA model, the reason why this is very important is, why is it a win-win model as it appears? Because the developer gets the land. Why? Because he is doing a rehabilitation of slums for free housing, giving them free housing. So because he is giving them free housing, the developer gets a portion of land to make saleable housing. So the profit which is generated from the saleable housing is cross subsidized into making the units for slum rehab housing, right? So government का क्या फायदा इसमें कि लोगों को घर मिला. SRA is doing the work of BMC and the larger government. Developer का क्या फायदा है? Land का cost हट गया. So whatever saleable component he is selling in the market, उसमें का some portion will be subsidizing the rehab का construction, बाकी everything is profit, right? And लोगों का क्या फायदा इसमें? And ये फायदा मैं जानबूझ के बोल रहा हूँ because that's how the scheme is there. लोगों क्या कहते हैं? फ्री का घर मिल रहा है, right? So this free housing, developer winning, SRA winning and free housing, but in the end, is it a win-win model? No, right? Because we are seeing then, अगर इतना win-win model होता तो we should have had better housing complexes, right? जो भी redevelopment हुआ है, वो नहीं है, right? So this is what we should try to question, that any policy or any scheme, it appears in a certain way, but when it goes on the ground, it can have lot of loopholes and problems. And it's important as you go out in the market as students and now then as practitioners, that what is that problem within this value chain, या ये system में problem कहाँ पे है, rather than just saying कि government is not doing anything, people are not doing anything, developer is not doing anything, etc. It's important to understand more stepwise. You should approach any problem stepwise so that you can understand the root cause and then think about solution, right? Can we think about a solution if we don't understand the problem? We can't, right? And that is where this whole idea is. So before I jump to how we approached this problem, I want to show you guys some recent news that has been there out around slums in Mumbai, right? But before I do that, मेरे को समझना था कितने लोग न्यूज़ पढ़ते हैं, न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ते हैं या न्यूज़ देखते हैं फोन पे apart from Instagram reels है कोई? So what is like, can someone tell me in past few months what are some of the news related to informal housing, slums, what you have read? कुछ भी एक तो सबको पता होना ही चाहिए, it's very popular. क्या चल रहा है मुंबई में अराउंड slum housing, informal housing, धारावी, right? इसके अलावा anything else? So that is another thing, right? हर rule, government की policies, the new government, everyone agrees that every party and every government has a huge control on how urban development happens in the city, right? Different parties will have different agendas. Automatically then वो जो IAS officers होंगे, they will also be working towards that agenda. Automatically the policies which are shaping that will also have certain similar agenda. So it's very important for you to also understand कि how is housing, how the idea of housing has evolved over a period of years, right? Which time period had what kind of policies? Because that will help you understand that what is the current government priorities, right? It's very important to look at this as much as जो आप लोग site visits कर रहे हो, लोगों से बात कर रहे हो, but zoom out करना भी जरूरी है, so that you understand कि ये कब हुआ था. अगर ये 1980 में हुआ था ये redevelopment, ये 2000 में हुआ था, तो who was the government in 2000? What was the policy that time? What was the scheme that time? So it's important to see the flaws and the positives of each time for you to assess कि आज क्या चल रहा है, right? So it's important to understand this, and I'll show you some of the news which are there, right? So there is, and I want to understand कि is this triggering some sort of ideas, conversations, right? So अपन एक interactive we can keep it. right? So that I also understand ki what do you guys feel about such news, what we read. So there was this recent news which talks about हाई कोर्ट ने उसको अपहेल्ड किया, मतलब उसको अप्रूव किया कि देयर वाज अ रेगुलेशन, महाराष्ट्र रेगुलेशन ऑफ 2022, नाउ दैट जो भी रिजर्व्ड ओपन स्पेसेस है, ओपन स्पेसेस सबको समझता है राइट, डेवलपमेंट प्लान आई गेस सबने देखा है डीपी में, देयर आर रिजर्व्ड ओपन स्पेसेस, देयर आर प्लेग्राउंड्स, देयर आर आरजीपीजी, देयर आर डिफरेंट ओपन स्पेसेस में भी देयर आर वेरियस कैटेगरीज. What this rule says is कि जो भी बॉम्बे में 500 स्क्वायर मीटर से बड़ी जो जगह है which are categorized as reserved open spaces, उसमें 65% of that plot can be used for slum rehabilitation and 35% हमें उसको vacant रखना चाहिए because city को open spaces की भी जरूरत है. What do you guys think? What does this news trigger in your like कुछ ideas, positives, negatives? What do you think? How is this news? Any thoughts? तुमने देखा मतलब पढ़ा हो कि क्या क्या आइडियाज आ रहे हैं? बराबर. करेक्ट, लेकिन अभी ये फाइनल हो गया है. सो हाउ विल इट इम्पैक्ट द सिटी? हाउ विल दिस रूल इम्पैक्ट? इसमें बेसिकली क्या बोल रहे हैं कि जिनको घर नहीं है, जो टिपिकली स्लम रिहैबिलिटेशन के लिए जो स्कीम होती है उसमें वो बोल रहे हैं कि जो भी ओपन एरियाज है उसको मैक्सिमम पार्ट ऑफ दैट ओपन एरिया अगर 500 स्क्वायर मीटर से ज्यादा है सो इट विल बी यूज्ड फॉर स्लम रिहैबिलिटेशन. डू यू थिंक दैट देयर कैन बी सम पॉजिटिव और सम नेगेटिव आल्सो बोथ, और इट इज कंप्लीटली अ पॉजिटिव थिंग इज व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू पुश यू गाइस टुवर्ड्स थिंकिंग. डू यू थिंक दिस इज अ कंप्लीटली अ पॉजिटिव क्लॉज? ये होना चाहिए. हाँ मतलब कमर्शियली दिस मेनली फॉर द SRA scheme which is for the residential. Do you think इससे कुछ नेगेटिव हो सकता है अगर ये इंप्लीमेंट हो गया? जो भी बॉम्बे में है 500 स्क्वायर मीटर से ज्यादा ओपन स्पेसेस है, क्या नेगेटिव हो सकता है? Right. And do you think there can be other challenge of हाँ करेक्ट. Got it. Definitely, like because there will also be that Bombay mein already we have less open spaces, so it will lead to more reduction in open spaces, right? But then it has positives also and it has negatives also, right? This is, so I'm not passing any comment as of now. I'm just showing you certain news, right? So that you understand what is the kind of development. This was another news which is, what did the state government say? That the typical issue in SRA is what? प्रोजेक्ट्स खत्म नहीं होते एक बार शुरू हो गए तो. आई थिंक दैट एवरीवन नोस. हाफ कंस्ट्रक्शन चालू है, 10 साल से बंद पड़ा है, जो एग्जिस्टिंग स्ट्रक्चर है दैट इज ऑलमोस्ट नाउ डिलैपिडेटेड. स्टैंडर्ड प्रॉब्लम्स, राइट? ऑफ कोर्स द रीजंस वी ऑल नो, बिकॉज देयर माइट बी सम अप्रूवल इशू, some legal challenges if they have not followed the development control regulations. So the rule, the recent news was that government has decided ki whatever the stalled projects are, there will be new developers that would be appointed. And do we all know what is transit accommodation? What is it? Koi bolega? And why do we need transit accommodation? Exactly, right? And if you're not giving transit accommodation, then you give a monthly rent, correct? So if you see the stalled projects, it says have accumulated an unpaid rent of 279 crores, right? Which means this is another problem. When a developer takes the consent, what happens? People give the consent, annexure 2 करके एक document होता है, वो बनता है, who are the eligible residents of that slum, and then by law they are either supposed to go to transit accommodation for maybe the number of years that project will happen, or they are supposed to be given a rent. So there are many reasons why a project is stalled, right? So that's why this news came up. Another news was this, where the BMC proposed there will be 64 slum redevelopment projects on BMC land parcels. Okay? But what is the most important thing which you should know now is that the BMC stated that the consent of slum dwellers will not be needed for the redevelopment of this 64 plots, जो BMC के हैं. What do you think about this new rule now? क्या लगता है तुम लोग को कि ये तो बीएमसी की जमीन है ना, तो क्यों लेना चाहिए उनसे कंसेंट? बराबर है, ऐसा लग रहा है तुम लोग? What do you think? So hold that thought. We'll come back to this. These are like very difficult questions, right? That's why it's not black and white, is what I'm trying to show when you read this news. And this we all know is the Dharavi redevelopment that is happening. Who is doing it? Ani, it's a joint venture, right? SPV बोलते हैं उसको, joint venture है Adani and SRA में, where 80% of the stake is with Adani. SRA is, like we all know, is the approval authority, the main authority. So it's a joint venture, JV जिसको हम बोलते हैं, right? And now yesterday, or like I think last week, there was this recent news which Delhi now wants to take inspiration from Dharavi model and replicate it in the slum issues in Delhi. कितना अच्छा इनिशिएटिव है ना ये? नहीं, फिर भी हम इंस्पिरेशन ले रहे हैं. How many of you think that that's a good initiative? Right? Because even if the work is not started, the project report is out. You know exactly how there are models and there is a lot of work that has been, like, you know, हम जो models बनाते हैं ना, rendered models, कि कैसा होगा, कहाँ से पार्क जाएगा, कहाँ पे लोग resettle होंगे. So there are a lot of issues, right? So in short, if we look at today, in today's scenario, there are main 4 things broadly what Mumbai and informal housing situation is, right? One, they are trying to revive the stalled projects through new developers. Second is, they are trying to integrate open spaces into SRA schemes. Because of jaggi kahan bachi hai? Those are the only spaces left. Then there is more involvement of BMC for consent rules, so that the project can be fast. फास्ट करना है कोई भी स्लम रिहैबिलिटेशन प्रोजेक्ट में सबसे ज्यादा टाइम कहाँ लगता होगा? व्हाट डू यू गाइस थिंक? अप्रूवल्स में. बट उसके पहले नो, हाँ, कंसेंट लेने में, राइट? बिकॉज एवरीवन लिविंग इन दैट नेबरहुड, आज सिंपल, एवरी प्लेस, डिफरेंट प्लेसेस वी लिव, कोई सोसाइटीज में रहते हैं, कोई इंडिविजुअल बिल्डिंग्स में रहते हैं हम लोग. एक कमिटी को कुछ अगर डिसीजन भी लेना है वो सोसाइटी में, इज इट इजी? व्हाई? Exactly. And what else? Apart from the selfish interests, what are the other reasons? Why it is very difficult to take consent? Why is it difficult to organize? Why? Correct. Yeah, there is an emotional value, cultural value, social value. What else? The fear, insecurity, fear. Right? And apart from that, one of the other reasons is everyone has different motivations. It's not necessary, अगर suppose वहां पे कोई रह रहा है जो एक पर्टिकुलर होम बेस्ड वर्क करता है, लेट्स से घर में ही वो काम करते हैं, अब उन्हें ये भी रहता है कि ये बिल्डिंग बनने के बाद क्या हम वो कर पाएंगे, right? There would be some old people who live there. Would they be comfortable staying on the 20th floor? So every person has certain kinds of issues, which is why you can't, it's very difficult to arrive at this 90%, 80% consensus, right? So consensus becomes very difficult getting that. So that's why it's also a very challenging process. But then the moment you remove the consent rule, it becomes fast. But then, is it really then taking people into account, right? And then Dharavi redevelopment का continuous influence है because it's the biggest model that is being spread across. So I want to now like bracket it, right? जो हम आप लोग ने कहा, and what are the typical concerns around slum redevelopment? So one is displacement, because many people do not get relocated in the same location. They might be in the outskirts of the city, they might be 10 kilometers from the city, right? There will be a lot of issues. So उनकी जो इकोनॉमी है वहां पे जो काम करते हैं, उनकी जहाँ पे दुकान होगी या जहाँ काम के लिए जाते हैं, उसमें डिसरप्शन आ जाएगा suddenly. So that will create an impact on their livelihood and finances. Then home-based work, many people work within their houses, so that will create some sort of a change. Then ineligible. How many of you understand what is eligible and ineligible residents? What is eligibility? कौन decide करता है वो? हाँ? I'm not saying how it is made eligible. I am asking who decides eligibility criteria. On what basis? हाँ, but who decides this? What is the cutoff date? Who decides the cutoff date and how do they decide cutoff date? If there are 5 people living in a neighborhood, these 3 people will get the house, these 2 people will have to pay. होता है ना ऐसा? Not everyone gets that house. In Dharavi, how many of you know कि Dharavi में, do you think all the residents are being relocated in the same area? Where are they being relocated then? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Correct. So basically this cutoff date keeps shifting depending on who is in power, right? So there is a lot of political economy that goes into this. Why? Why is politics involved in slums? Exactly, right? So the moment you increase the cutoff date, you make more people eligible for the housing. So that would gain more attraction with like, हाँ, ये अच्छा corporator है, he's a good MLA, there's a good party, right? So there are those narratives that also play. Then prioritizing profit over people. We all know this, right? How slum redevelopment mein real estate is the biggest winner. Then environment concerns, right? So for example, there are few residents in Dharavi redevelopment who do not fall under the eligibility criteria, जो उनका जो cutoff date है, where they are also being resettled on salt pan lands, right? So what that would do, if it shifts, if people are relocated on salt pan lands or mangrove lands, what will happen? कैसे डैमेज होगा? Exactly. Because they are buffers, right? They protect city during flood, any kinds of disaster, water disaster, etc. Then community social fabric, right? Someone spoke about emotional value, social value, cultural value. They might have some open spaces within those neighborhoods where they must be celebrating different festivals. So there is a lot of cultural value associated the longer a community has been living there, right? So how many of you here live in societies or places which are more than 20 years old? Right? So मतलब व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस, लाइक व्हाट इज सम एसोसिएशन, वहाँ का कल्चरल वैल्यू क्या है वहाँ का? बट कुछ इवेंट्स, कुछ फेस्टिवल्स, कॉमन एरियाज हैं. हम्म. करेक्ट. हम्म. हाँ. करेक्ट. हम्म. एग्जैक्टली राइट. हम्म. या. करेक्ट. Or who here stays in places or in societies or buildings which are less than 5 years old? New societies, new buildings. हाँ, तुम बोलो. ठीक है. I want someone who's been in new society जो 2-3 साल पहले. हाँ ठीक है, ठीक है. शिफ्ट हुआ. तो डू यू रिलेट विथ व्हाट ही सेड? वैसा होता है तुम्हारे पे? हाँ. करेक्ट. बिकॉज द पीपल आर न्यू, देयर कनेक्शंस आर नॉट फॉर्म्ड एंड उनमें एक रिलेशन ही नहीं बना है. जब रिलेशन ही नहीं बना तो वहां का सोशल वैल्यू ऑलरेडी डेवलप होने में टाइम लगेगा. So what happens if you demolish a slum or a neighborhood which is 30-40 years old? What happens? Apart from the demolition and लोगों के घर चले जाना, what are you demolishing? What are you removing? Exactly. और वो तुम घर recreate कर सकते हो. क्या तुम social value या sense of community recreate कर सकते हो 2 साल में? Right? So that's why it's also important that how can design play a role in allowing that cultural values. अगर मैं कुछ जगह common pavilion जैसे कह रहा था, if we don't have such spaces जहाँ पे we can have such interactions, we further remove the chances of any social community oriented culture, right? And the last thing is the lack of transparency and resident participation, right? How many people are actually involved in the design processes when they are going any redevelopment or rehabilitation that happens? So I want to show you a video. I don't know ये audio काम करेगा या नहीं, but I'll try. And then I'll speak about the initiative which we took. I want सुना ही आएगा क्या सबको? How should I? Speaker है क्या यहाँ पे? अच्छा, माइक कैसे लगा के रखूं? Can you hear? Can you hear? ठीक है. I'll just restart.
Also excessively densified and a very inequitable development. Is there an alternative approach for housing the urban poor? If yes, how should we think about it? To answer the above question, it is first necessary to understand how the slum redevelopment projects are typically planned by the developers. A slum in a particular locality of the city is taken up the slum redevelopment under the slum rehabilitation scheme. A slum survey suggests the plot area and the number of existing tenements in the slum that need to be rehabilitated. What all must the rate of land to the rate of construction in that locality. Same component will also comprise of the dwelling units, common areas, and amenities. Based on the current market trends, the developer will decide an optimum unit size and an attractive price such that they get sold in the market easily. In this manner, the developer shall build both the rehab and the sale component on the same site. Now let's take a look at the economics of such projects. The total expenditure shall be the cost incurred on building both the rehab component and the sale component. Now, the developer will sell the sale units at a certain market rate to pay for all the incurred expenditure and in the process making substantial profits. But does the developer need to build so much sale component where the total sale is much more than the total expenditure? Maybe not. Ideally, he must build only as many sale units as are required to be sold on the market to cover the total expenditure. This is the alternative that we spoke about earlier. But this is possible only and only if people actively participate in the entire development process and engage with the developer and the administration. This alternative is about prioritizing adequacy, affordability, and inclusivity in housing and not profitability.
So basically, what we tried to do then, sorry. So we tried to, so this was basically a grant which we received in 2020, and we tried to build a area of, we tried to focus on if the slum rehabilitation scheme is failing, then what is the alternative we can think of, right? And one of the alternatives which we thought we should be building on is self redevelopment. Does anyone understand community-led redevelopment, self-redevelopment? So earlier we spoke about, when we started, there is a people component, cooperative housing society, there is a developer, and then there is SRA. So what we thought is that there are like some models which we could see in the market where the cooperative housing society plays the role of the developer, where the society takes money from the bank and then they decide what kind of housing needs to be built. But that has been happening in middle income group society, big society. But we thought, can we do something like this in informal settlements? So the challenge, or the main challenge we received there, was the banks were not ready to give loans to the cooperative housing society of slum dwellers because of the land issues, legality issues, right, eligibility issues. And that is why we had to kind of relook at our whole model, and we thought, let us, even if we can't right now go and do a self redevelopment by involving communities, can we build a literacy platform? A platform where people can understand this complex terminology of FSI, premium, TDR, what does the regulation say, right? How many of you have read any development control regulations, any clauses by any chance? Any of you have read any policies, any regulations, the legal language? DCR पता है सबको? किसी ने पढ़ा है कुछ, कोई component पढ़ा है DCR का? What was your major challenge when you read that? Is it, how was the language? Exactly. तो ambiguity की chances भी बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाती है, right? So we wanted to think that if we want to build towards a people led approach, first we need to make the information accessible to people so that they understand that first, and then that can be maybe then this can be used as a tool for by civil society organizations, NGOs, who can take this knowledge, use this material to make people aware of these technical terms, of this right. So that's how we approached. And we realized that some of the key problems or key ingredients rather to materialize or to bring into effect the people-led housing or community housing approach are these 4-5 things. One is that policy and regulatory environment, right? If the policy itself does not allow for certain kind of housing, then automatically that becomes very difficult to build legally, right? Then we need strong institutions where the public and private, they are working in collaboration and people are also an equal part of it rather than one dominating the other. Then political will, right? Typically, like we discussed, there are different parties, different challenges. So there has to be a strong political intensity to make this happen, a people-led housing model. And then community ownership honi chahiye. People should feel that they want to be a part of this and they want to kind of work towards housing redevelopment issues which might come to them, right? The participation. And another challenge which we thought can be a point of entry for what we can build on is having accurate and reliable information. Because today the information itself is like very difficult, right? The DCR में हम जो पढ़ते हैं, it is for the people's housing, but they only don't understand what it is trying to say. So that's what we try to focus on, right? And what we thought is this is like more like building ki agar hum aise ek information repository बनाए, which is easy to understand, can that lead to better literacy, better understanding, which can lead people to participate better, right? आज की तारीख में if I want to participate and even argue on certain things, अगर मुझे ही knowledge नहीं है तो मैं कहाँ से participate करूँगा, right? So we thought कि if this knowledge can be built, which is accessible to everyone, that can lead to people participating and that can give them more agency and power to decide कि हाँ हमें यहाँ पे open space चाहिए, बच्चों को खेलने के लिए जगह चाहिए, ये policy में तो ये provision भी है, तो आप क्यों नहीं दे रहे हो, right? There this can be that negotiations that can happen if one is more aware. And this is the model then we thought, right? कि एक हम ऐसा एक literacy platform अगर बनाए, which talks about legal, technical, financial और कुछ case studies होंगे उसमें, which can be used then by different NGOs, community-based organizations and communities themselves who will understand this better and they can disseminate और आगे भी उसको प्रचार कर सकते हैं उसका. So the pilot city we took was Thane because that was something which was closer. I'm from Thane. So we started documenting different informal settlements in Thane. जैसे आप लोग you are studying in Mira Bhayandar, South Bombay, various places. We also went to different places, started understanding people's realities. How are they living? When was the redevelopment proposed here? Did any developer come? यहाँ पे land cost क्या है? Toilets है या नहीं? Electricity है या नहीं? Access to education है या नहीं? Hospitals है क्या आजू बाजू? All this understanding we started to do in different pockets of Thane, and also parallelly doing policy analysis, right? Ki what is the government currently doing? What is the slum rehabilitation scheme talking about? So you need to understand two things in parallel, right? One, people's realities, and second, policy realities, right? Because so if you try to take one, you will realize that it is not practical, right? You cannot also just rely on the sentiments of people but not do anything about it, right? You need to also have like adequate policy mechanism so that you bring the two where people's needs are also into consideration and there is a regulation which also allows you to do that. Otherwise it will just remain in academia and theory books, right? So this is what we tried to do, and we did multiple. We spoke to different stakeholders. We spoke to different developers who have done slum rehabilitation projects, the challenges they face, what are the issues which is not in our control, right? There will be so many issues, right? If there is a local political party change or a minister change, it is not in our control. But what is in our control is, can that information be made accessible, is something we thought. And that's how we started building this buckets, where we did legal literacy, where we took different, so slum rehabilitation scheme, when did it start? Anyone knows which year? Huh? हाँ, SRA कब शुरू हुआ? Yes. Yeah. So SRA started in December 1995, and what it led to is, now in 2025, how many years? 30 years have passed, right? Yeah, in fact 40 years, if I'm not wrong, right? So in the past so many 2-3 decades, the realities have not changed, but some of it has become much worse, right? Now we thought, let's collate, also have a repository of different circulars, government resolutions, notifications that have happened over a period of time, and try to bucket it so that people also understand, right? Today if I have to find a government regulation on the website, it's so difficult, right? What tab should I select, कौन से link पे जाऊँ, कहाँ से download करूँ, वो website crash हो रहा है. So that is something we thought, it's also another thing which is not accessible easily. So collating that, and then converting all the regulations into easy to understand graphics, because people understand drawings and visuals more than the tough language. So that's we did. Then in technical literacy, we try to focus on how there are certain mechanisms in place. If there is a transit accommodation, what is the way one can access transit? How is transit provided? What is a saleable component? What is a rehab component? There are a lot of these definitions. How does one calculate a carpet area, built up area, super built up area? Because when you say 300 square feet, it's also important to understand whether that 300 square feet is carpet or built up or super built up, because you get that much lesser area or bigger area, right? So all that collation, and then process, right? It's been so many years since SRA has happened, but till date, if you ask anyone who has worked in the slum rehabilitation space, everyone will tell you a process of slum redevelopment, and none of those processes will match, because हर एक का अपना system है, right? But what is the official system is also a very big challenge. Where does it begin? What happens in between? Whose approval is needed? What consultation needs to happen? When does the project begin? When does the OC come? When does the CC come? What are these terminologies? So we started understanding, and we started demonstrating this process also, so that people also understand when they should participate, because sometimes you are too late in participating, and that time the project has already gotten the approval. So it's also important to understand within what timeline should one enter. So, and then the financial literacy, and this is something which is extremely difficult, right? In that video also you saw that sale component hona chahiye, but kitna hona chahiye? What is that limit so that there is profit, but people's quality of housing is not compromised? It has to be that sweet spot, right? Where you are earning, but you are also providing good quality accommodation. Have we able to achieve that, or it is more profit and less of quality of accommodation? And that is something we started talking to different banks and different small contractors. If there can be banks who can provide loans, if there can be contractors who can do those projects, but with lesser profit margin, but good quality of housing for both rehab and sale. And that was another sort of this thing. So I'll run you through the website broadly, and we'll try to then, the website is open to all. You can also then look at it at much more length later. But then I'll show you how we tried to collate this together, and then we can just open it up for discussion. One second. So basically, like I told you, right, these are the 4 buckets: legal, technical, procedural, and financial. So now, for example, if you go to legal literacy, so this you see there are different clauses, right? So if you open, there's something called as UDCPR. Anyone knows what is UDCPR? Control regulations. So if you go there, there is the 14.7.1. These are all basically, this is a slum redevelopment scheme, slum rehabilitation scheme chapter in UDCPR. So clause by clause, we try to graphically represent what are different issues, what is that clause particularly talking about, what is a free space, what is a premium, what is FSI, and we started converting into graphics like this. So it's like a little difficult to view here because of the screen size. But for example, this is like, there is a clause on eligible commercial or economic activity that can happen. Now, what do you require? What are the official documents that are required, right? So one is the license under the shops, then electricity bills, photo pass, right? So when you start breaking that 2 line, 3 line का इतना बड़ा clause into graphics, you start understanding, अरे हाँ ये तो हमें मिला ही नहीं है. We should ask this from the developer. We should ask this, that there has to be a common area that's not been given. So in a way, this awareness is what we were trying to build. And the reason why we thought it is good to build this in the form of the regulation is so that people, when they refer to that document, the official document, they can look at it and then go here and try to see what is relevant and what is not relevant. So for example, there is another thing, right? How much payments that need to be made to SRA. So each tenement has, there is a certain payment, and there is a deposited, basically that there is a duration during which that payment should be made. So there are different sort of clauses within this. In legal literacy, in technical literacy, if you see, we have created definitions of different common terminologies, right? For example, let's say built up area. Many people don't even understand what is built up area. So what is the best way you can make people understand what is a built up area, right? So by actually doing, people understand plans, right? Because घर के plans सबको समझ में आते हैं. So you give some color codes, right? Like the pink color is basically the carpet area, and when you include the area under the walls and when you combine it, that is built up area is area under the, in the pink and area in red. So you start visualizing, so people know how to measure where they are living. So that is what technical literacy comprises of. And then in procedural literacy, what I was telling you, right? There are different steps that needs to be followed in the whole SRA process. Now, where does what step come? So it is very difficult to see here, but then there are different stakeholders, right? There is a cooperative housing society, the first, then there is developer and architect, and then there is SRA. Which stakeholder plays what role at what time in the process is something this evaluates. There will be times when SRA has no role to play, let's say, in particular time of that event. So then it has no role to play at that stage. So you start understanding these processes. And then these are the resources where I was telling you, right? There are different circulars, government notifications. So you will see there are different circulars of each time. For example, if I want to understand ineligible slum dwellers, so I click on ineligible slum dwellers, you click on read, and then it automatically leads you to that official government document of SRA, where you understand that who is eligible, who is ineligible, when did this clause come. So you know that if someone is telling that, you can always take a print of it and produce it at the right time, at the right stage, right? So that was also another part we thought was very important, because that was also not very easy to access. And then we had this community forum where people can also put their queries, they can talk, they can understand, debate. यार हमारे बस्ती में तो ऐसे हुआ था, आपके बस्ती में क्या हुआ? You know, you start understanding this, and then you come up with some sort of a model which has worked in some place but not worked in other place. And we did the same, this whole thing in Marathi as well, because we thought that sometimes this language, not sometimes, often this language becomes a barrier. Because often we talk, what we talk in this society, people don't even understand ground pe what you want to say. So we started doing this whole thing, like for example, legal literacy, we called it Kaideshir Saksharta, Tantrik Saksharta, which is technical literacy. And each of this, the terminology here also, like Punarvikas Yojaneche patrata means eligibility, right? Patrata is eligibility. So lot of this terminology is also like, here it is written patra kon ahe, and then there are this demarcations, who is eligible, who is non-eligible, ineligible. So this is how we try to do this. And what we think as of now, of course, like the idea of self redevelopment is a much more complicated process. But then if you have some sort of a literacy, if you can create that awareness in whatever work we are doing to the people who are those rightful owners, I think we can reach towards one step of people led or people oriented approach towards housing. So that's where I would stop, and happy to take any questions, thoughts. Uh, what do you guys feel? What is the way in which you would approach your housing module? Some things you learned. So yeah, I'll take a pause here. Anything?
One step that you take is retraining the residents itself.
Hmm.
That is one of the best way we can approach this problem.
Hmm.
The next, or the idea that I came up with now is we can have a council of architects who can, look up to the project what has been put forth.
Hmm.
Because the recent case in my life is my grandmother's building is being redeveloped.
Hmm.
And I'm coming to know that this topic is related to that now.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we had went to the meeting in where they showed us the plan of the whole building,
Hmm.
and there was no open area in that, and it has already been approved. And I had questioned that there was no RG for them, and the commercial builder has already taken up half of the plot. There was there is some code related thing to it. So if a collective group of architects question the design of the project,
Yeah.
we can stop half of the problem there.
Right. And do you think, as architects or the architects you know, or your other architecture friends, do we learn such things in architectural discourse or architectural courses, or do architects talk about such things, about housing rights, people? Huh?
It starts in self-service.
No, I'm just asking the architects you know who are practicing in Mumbai. You might know, right? Some architects who are doing projects. Do you know any architects who are working in such kinds of projects which is involving people, involving communities? It's very rare to find those, right? It's very easy to find an architect of that building, right? Architects talking about FSI, TDR, finance, profit. So probably I think it's also important then, as you are developing, I think you will have thesis, right, in fifth year. It's also important to think about what component you want to also involve yourself in over and above just the designing, right? Is there something more than just the building which you want to think? Is there a people part in missing, or you are only putting people in Photoshop, right? Photoshop में बहुत सुंदर दिखते हैं बादल, rendering, people, right? But those buildings are empty often. So the question is also going away from Photoshop and trying to think about realities, right? And the realities are much more complicated and they are much more messy. It's not very simple and straightforward, right? What else? Any other thoughts?
So in most of the SRA projects
Hmm.
we have witnessed. So there's this one project of organizing mobility, right?
Hmm.
ICT. So if you see, half of it was the factory from Tata, and there was slums that
Hmm.
were around that project.
Yeah.
So one of my house helps is from that slum area, and she's been discussing this a lot with me recently that these guys are pushing them to sell off their house
Hmm.
because that's easy way out for the developer, because one that you do not have to deal with them anymore, so they give a big amount to them saying that
if I give you small amounts in terms of rents
Hmm.
over a period of say 3 years, 4 years, you're not going to save up. But if I give you a bigger amount, say I give you 2 lakhs right now, so you can look up to your lifestyle, you can plan out things, and this is how they portray
Yeah.
upgradation to them. So for somebody who is of like a house.
Hmm.
So for them, 50 lakh amount is a lot. So they are always, how they have discussions. So they always incline towards selling off their property to these developers.
Hmm.
And these developers also portray saying, we give you a better rate than the market.
Yeah.
So for them, for the developers, so they're clearing off that
Right.
kind of strata of the society. They do not want that merging with
Hmm.
upper crowd.
Right.
So these guys, always talk to us saying that we've been living here since say 30 years, 40 years. So at the end of the day, you feel like how Bombay is treated as migrant city. So you say that you spend a major portion of your life in one area,
Hmm.
but just because some big
Yeah.
shot has come into the picture, they just wipe you off
Yeah.
like you're dirt.
Yeah.
So these are the literal words
Hmm.
that they use. And then at times you feel that no matter how good of architect you're
Yeah.
supposed to be or you're portrayed,
Yeah.
are you really working towards these things?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, for our bread and butter, we start working with developers.
Yeah.
But then you realize that very little is paid attention to these lives
Right.
that really matter.
Yeah. They are more on AutoCAD.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So this was one point that she pointed out very evidently that they just want money.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, if you're from slum, they're not really going to treat you well.
Hmm.
When they need the land, when they need that I'm going to do something for you, they'll come and give you price.
Hmm.
Then you're not even entertained me or their office.
Correct.
Forget meeting the person.
Right.
So once you sell your house off, you're done.
Yeah. No, that's a major issue. That's why there are very few like architects who work on public housing projects, right? Because public housing is not that easy. Creating a bungalow or a private apartment is much more easy because there's only one client, one person. There are no many stakeholders, right? But then if you are able to create a good public housing project, it becomes a model for a lot of other cities to follow. How many of you know about the Aranya housing project in Indore by Balkrishna Doshi? Right? So B.V. Doshi, one of the major reasons why that project has been very successful is because it allowed for the flexibility of people to build their own housing. Right? There was the basic services which were given, electricity, toilet, lines, water, and then people were given certain plots and height restrictions within which they should be building. So people started building as their family income grew, as their mobility and family members grew. So there was that. It was not a rigid way to think कि आप लोग को ऐसे ही रहना है, but still it allowed for certain rules to be there in place. So there was rules, but still there was flexibility. And any good model should have a combination of both, where people's needs are also accounted for. And then the policy also supports that for the ground implementation, right? That's what I was saying. आप लोग जो interviews ले रहे हो, site पे जा रहे हो, and then also understanding what is the policy saying, what is the regulation saying. Balancing the two is very important, is for a practical way to approach this.
But do you think that is possible in some of the cities like Mumbai?
That's what in Mumbai it's extremely complicated because the land availability. The major question in Mumbai is about land, because the land is scarce, right? Because we are waterlogged. So the easiest way is to go up. But the question is, when we are even thinking about vertical housing, it should be vertical housing and not vertical slum. So what differentiates a vertical slum with vertical housing is a question which needs to be addressed, right? How much profit is enough profit so that it doesn't play with the lives of people, so that they have basic light, air, ventilation, right? So that is something which really needs a very inclusive way to look at design, right? Yeah, you cannot maybe have open plots like Aranya housing in Mumbai, but then aren't there examples where you can have well lit, well ventilated apartments in a housing unit in a building? Is it not possible? Is a question we need to ask, right, as a society.
Okay, but that will only be solved when you do not see it as a salable component and somebody where you just looking at SR.
That is one way. Of course, you need to look at, so for example, in community-led housing approaches, one of the approaches is upgradation, where you're not talking about a complete wiping off the slum, right? You are looking at each area from that context, which is what is missing, right? Right now, the policy or the slum rehabilitation scheme is same for a 10-year-old slum versus a 40-year-old slum. Whereas a 40-year-old slum, they might have access to electricity, light, water, they might have pakka structures. So can that be legally notified as a non-slum? Because we have demarcated a slum ऐसा ही दिखता है. So much of slum terminology is very visual. That's why in a lot of discourses, if you see, I myself don't use the word slum. I use it as a settlement, a recognized settlement, non-recognized settlement, right? Because the moment you use this word slum, it creates a certain image in your head. So then you are not able to contextualize, na, ki is Dharavi same as Ambujwadi? So then the people are calling Gauthan also slum only, then Koliwada ko bhi log slum bol rahe, wo bhi G+1 hai. So what is that terminology shift also we need to think. And then the question comes is removing them and completely demolishing them and building is the only alternative. But then the other challenge is then if you don't do it, you remove the profit component of the developer. Because the easiest way to do it is that to remove them and build a house so that maximum land can be used for sale. Exactly. But within that, let's say if there might be situations where it actually has to, you will have to create a building because of certain constraints. If there is inadequate land, if there is marshes, or if the land is not suitable for housing, तब वहाँ पे शायद construction करना भी पड़े. The question is that what is the quality of construction you are doing for rehab, right? Is it affordable? Is it adequate?
Because that's also how we look at them, right?
Yeah.
So if I have to just redevelop a plot for somebody who is who resides in a building of say G+3, 4 right now, so you will give them a good building of say G+9, but in the same place, if you're doing a slum redevelopment, you look at them only as they देंगे बस.
Exactly. Because this narrative has been fed by local, with like a lot of politics comes into play and stuff. So that is also the issue, right? It's the mindset shift, which takes a lot of time. अब by default ऐसे ही देखते हैं लोग फुकट का घर. People don't look at it that वो घर रहने लायक होगा या नहीं. They look at it as a unit. And this is the whole idea, right? Whether you look at housing as a unit or you look at housing as an interconnected system where a house is connected to a local school, it's connected to a local hospital, where there are shops nearby, where there is a park to play for the kids, right? That is about housing, right? So अगर एक settlement है जहाँ पे घर अच्छा बना है लेकिन वहाँ पे open area नहीं है खेलने के लिए, so entering that project from thinking about what open space can create that value addition in that community is also a housing problem. That is not an open space problem. Of course, it's an open space problem. But if there is an open space, it will allow for those housing units, the people are living in those housing units to stay there, right? नहीं तो वो छोड़ के कहीं और ही जाएंगे, right? People do not come to cities for housing. People come to cities for work. And wherever they find work, वहाँ पे आसपास कैसे भी घर में रह लेते. This narrative shift that people want houses is something which has been fed over a period of years, which is why people are like, हाँ ठीक है, एक यूनिट तो मिलेगा, उसको फिर बेच देंगे, पैसे आ जाएंगे कुछ. So you are also looking at promoting that commodity culture, right? You are not thinking about housing as a way to live, but you are looking at housing as a way to sell, as an asset. So there has to be, it is of course an asset, but at the same time, अगर तुम वहां रहने वाले हो, तो रहने के लिए मुझे खाली छत और ये तो नहीं चाहिए ना. There has, like, my day to day cannot be within that. There is something more than that, right? So then how do we look at housing is a question we need to address in wherever we go, whatever projects we are doing. And if we don't do it now, we will by default promote that in our work, wherever you work next after college and stuff. So it's an important factor to consider within housing as a subject. It's not a unit. It's much more than that. It's a system. Anything else? Oh.
So the thing is, like, people living in slums are just treated like they are just a kid. But firstly, they are living in slums, and then being there, they develop a family kind of surrounding environment. Then SRE comes and we build here, and then उसके बाद they are shifted to a transit accommodation. जहाँ मतलब they are just treated like a thing, मतलब यहाँ से उठा के बाहर आ गया. Then वहाँ भी they try to build that environment. और we just visited in a hall, like in Moshihara, it was something fun. And it was full of informal settlement. So उनके बीच SRE project started हुए. And it was like beach में open space थी, and everyone was chilling. और वहाँ पे gathering होती है, वहाँ पे सारे festival होते हैं. But when they are shifted to any transit, वहाँ पे ये सब नहीं है. And ऐसे में transit is not in a good हालत में होता ही नहीं है वो. Transit are more worse than
Yeah, because वो temporary है.
yeah. Then after we shifted from transit to SRE building, the SRE buildings are like the lobbies are so wide and that is so small. So my question is why we are not designing the SRE buildings? मतलब इतना भी कि people can live there happily, like from slums से बाहर जाके उनको वैसे भी कुछ नहीं मिल रहा है. Everything is changed एकदम जमीन से आसमान वाला फर्क. And then उसके बावजूद we are not getting the life that we personal cooperative society वाले लोग देते हैं.
Yeah, and one of the reason, like the main reason for that is how do you look that as a project which has to be given to people, or do you look at this as a project कि वो खत्म कर रहा है, निपटाना है, ताकि मेरा major focus is on the sale component, right? Because if I'm getting money after selling something, the typical idea is I will design that better for which people are going to pay, for which I have to anyways give it for free. The involvement, the engagement, the quality of the concrete which is used, the way the spaces are thought of, does not go much thinking into that, because the end goal is about maximizing the land for selling. And कम से कम लैंड में उसको खड़ा करके दे दो, ताकि ऑन पेपर हमने इतने लोगों को रिहेबिलिटेट कर दिया. कैसे किया, लोग रह रहे या नहीं, कैसे रह रहे हैं, is a question which is not spoken or discussed about. But for it to be done, you really then need to kind of have that approach where both rehab and sale component are for people only, even if they might be from different social groups, income groups, but they both are for people. So that component of that people bringing into that thinking process, if it is not there from day one, eventually you will end up such projects only. That's why many projects are like this. That is the reason why the scheme has not been successful the way it should have been, because the quality, the lot of the small things, right? For example, lifts band ho jate hain, right? How would old people go up and down for 10 floors? Lot of this, right? Those lifts are also like they are not maintained. Operation maintenance, there is no maintenance only. बहुत बार वो फिर लिफ्ट के आप ही लोग कचरा डालना शुरू कर देते, so those actually become a dump yard. So there are lot of these factors which has to be accounted in the initial design processes, and that can only happen when people also, there is a campaign where people are collecting and they are demanding कि हमें यहाँ पे इतना ये चाहिए, ये नहीं चाहिए, ये ऐसे होना चाहिए. And when can that happen? When there is a collective approach. And for collective approach, you need that consensus, people coming together. And how will people come together? When you have some sort of a common language you understand certain your rights. You should know your rights. So yes, बहुत सारे factors have to be in place for eventually to translate into design. Design is a very small part of the whole ecosystem. Lot of things that happen before design. If it is just like चलो इतने लोगों ने consent दे दिया, if वो अगर वो फट like if it happens pretty quick, then automatically it will impact your final output. So that process leading to that final design has to be much more participatory, has to be much more engaging. Communication होना चाहिए, consultation होना चाहिए, back and forth होना चाहिए. It's like when you design for a private client, तुम सीधा उसको घर बना के फिर नहीं बुलाते हो ना उसको, आओ आपके घर में रहने. हर जगह पे टॉयलेट के नल से लेके लिविंग रूम से लेके बाहर लॉन से लेके सब डिस्कस करना पड़ता है, राइट? सो फिर देन यहाँ पे हम कैसे कर रहे हैं? सो इट्स अबाउट दैट शिफ्ट इन द वे वी think about that process, and one of the ways we thought is that process can be shifted is by making people understand this terminology. कि अगर मुझे पता है कि अगर मैं किसी को FSI सिंपल लैंग्वेज में एक्सप्लेन कर सकता हूँ, if my mother and my brother they both can understand FSI TDR premium in the same language, then automatically मैं घर से 2 लोग लेके आ रहा हूँ कि we understand this. This will lead to many people understanding this, which will lead to more sort of demand कि हमें ऐसा घर चाहिए, हमें ऐसी चीजें चाहिए. So it's a process. So yeah, it's not a very straightforward answer to your question. Anything else? Yeah. See, in Mumbai, the biggest issue is the land issue, right? Because the moment you think about retrofitting or upgradation, you completely are questioning the whole model of developer-led, right? Because उसमें profit ही नहीं है ना, so वहाँ पे वो economy support नहीं करेगी. Or if you want to really look at upgradation retrofitting, first you need to identify that not all slums are same. The moment you are saying all slums are same, then how do you even fit this narrative of upgradation? The moment you say कि हाँ ये slum में पानी और बिजली है, यहाँ पे maybe light या electricity का issue है, and यहाँ पे कुछ घर कच्चे हैं, so then you have certain entry point where you are like okay, these problems can be solved. But the moment I am saying कि no ये भी slum है वो भी slum है, इनको तो building में ही जाना चाहिए, because वही बिकेगा market में भी. So then upgradation becomes very tricky, and the policy itself doesn't allow. There is no policy for upgradation. The major policies are about new housing, greenfield development approach. Brownfield के लिए there was a sites and services scheme, again not an upgradation, but that was good in a way that it provided the site, it provided the services, and it allowed for people to build their units. Yeah, like it happened in Shivaji Nagar in M East Ward, right? As far as the other projects, other things are concerned, for example, there are examples which you can look in Ahmedabad. There was a slum networking project. What that did was it gave people a 10-year no eviction guarantee. कि आपको 10 साल तक यहाँ पे तोड़ा नहीं जाएगा आपकी बस्ती. The moment you give that assurance, so you provide security to people, and then you gave them basic lighting, electricity, services, water services, and then people started upgrading themselves. After 10 years, it never looked like a slum ka typical definition, because people invested as their families grew, as their incomes grew. Why? Because people had that feeling that ये तोड़ा नहीं जाएगा, which often becomes another issue with upgradation, because people are always living under the fear कि कब तोड़ देंगे, तो क्यों invest करूँ मैं मेरे घर में? So that policy also has to allow that, for that to happen. Like slum networking program allowed for that to happen. That's why people could do it, because it allowed people to feel security. But if the policy itself is like कि कभी भी बस्ती टूट सकती है, कभी भी developer आ सकता है, developer अभी आके बता देगा नया, so automatically एक तो ये narrative है, then land is another narrative. So there are mix of this policy and land factors, and big cities may it becomes very tricky then. In smaller cities, it is still the challenge is little less, but still Yeah, economy, policy, legal frameworks, people's perception. That हाँ माइंडसेट शिफ्ट इज वन थिंग, बट अगर माइंडसेट शिफ्ट होने के बाद भी अगर मेरा जो रेगुलेशंस या रेगुलेटरी मैकेनिज्म ही अलाउ नहीं कर रहा है वो, so then it becomes more challenging to do that. And in fact there is this program called ROOH, roof over our heads. What they are essentially doing is, their idea is to create local economy, promote local economy where people are upgrading their own house from climate resilient perspective. वेयर अगर सपोज छत लीक हो रही है और टेम्परेचर बहुत ज्यादा है वो घर में, सो वही लोकल एरिया में जो ये लोकल कॉन्ट्रैक्टर जो ये फिक्स कर सकता है, सो दे आर ट्राइंग टू डू दैट मॉडल वेयर दैट इज फिक्स्ड, द वॉल्स आर रिफर्बिश्ड, द सेम स्पेस इज कंप्लीटली नाउ हैज अ डिफरेंट look which is more sustainable, more cooler. So this is what roof over our heads is talking about, that you need roof over our heads and fix certain things for it to be a habitable space. So that's exactly what that program is pushing for. But then again, it's very difficult to scale that up because that narrative is very difficult to build. Because by default, people like slum है तो इसको क्यों promote करना है? इसको तोड़ के buildings बनो. Because we have certain image in our head कि world class city ऐसी ही दिखती है. So how do you break that perception, right? So you done? ठीक है. I hope it was good for people. I'll share my email ID in case किसी को अगर anyone wants to reach out. So happy to connect. But I hope you guys learned something additional. It'll be helpful, hopefully. And I hope I didn't make you guys more depressed.